I have conversations from before and during the first days of the Russian full-scale invasion with friends who went through the war firsthand. And as we've just crossed over the 2-year mark of the war, I want to start sharing a series of some of these conversations. Provide a little bit of a microcosm of what Ukrainians were thinking and feeling in the lead up to and during the full-scale invasion. The friend that I had the most communication with was in Kherson. I'd known her for several years prior to the full-scale invasion. For privacy reasons, as with many other stories that I tell on this channel, her name is not going to be used. She'll simply be my friend from Kherson. In the month before the war, we started talking about the escalation of tensions, how she hoped that the Russians weren't going to launch a bigger war, how people continued to die in the fighting in Donbass, and on January 11th, she wrote,
I hope the war in Donbass ends soon, and the Russians not to launch a bigger war. But people still continue to kill. It's not clear why and for what, and when will it stop.
And on January 14th, she shared even more thoughts.
Nothing has changed. I don't delve into news too much. I don't want to add sadness to my life. Lately, things have not been easy. Everything that's been happening lately is very difficult. The Russians constantly arrange wars and troubles. It's terrible. Something is constantly happening that does not allow you to live normally. I think in every country and in every place there are certain pitfalls. But in Ukraine, everything is too sad. So everyone leaves to work in Europe. It's horrible. Sometimes everything seems very difficult.
Our conversations for the next month were largely normal, discussing depression, our dogs, our hopes for 2022. But as the month went on, I kept up with the news about the possibility of a full-scale Russian invasion. I asked her about it on February 17th.
Russia has not counted. America helps Ukraine with the supply of weapons. We can expect anything from Putin. I hope he will stop.
Just a week before the full-scale invasion, we still had hope it wouldn't happen. I certainly couldn't fathom that Russia would really do something so insane. I didn't have deep knowledge of Russian culture. I didn't know what they'd done in Chechnya with over 200,000 dead civilians over the course of 2 years, or how they'd stolen 20% of Georgian land. And honestly, my grasp of the war in Donbass and the theft of Crimea was rudimentary. If I'd fully understood these things as I do now, I probably would have begged her and all of my other friends to try and get the hell out of Ukraine, at least for a few months, to see what was going to happen. On February 22nd, we talked more about the possible invasion. She commented,
I'm okay, but very worried about the situation with Russians.
I asked if she thought that Russia would truly invade. I had no concept of how quickly life was about to turn upside down. Throughout our conversation, she shared more.
Putin is an idiot. He said that Russia has been supporting the war for 8 years and will not just back down, and is not going to step aside. He always claimed that there were no Russian troops in the temporarily occupied territories. But today, he changed his mind and says that we are here. And yes, indeed, Russian troops are there. And the Russians say that Putin is adequate. And Zelensky calls to fight with them. People in Russia are absolutely zombified and do not understand what is happening. Today, Putin announced that there were Russian troops in Donbass. Also, he always denies this. He fights for territories that do not belong to Russia. I hope that there will not be a full-scale war. But what Putin is doing is clearly shows that he is an inadequate.
This was a chilling conversation, but as I remember it, while concerned, I thought for sure this was kind of like a game of chicken. Putin would divert at the very last second, possibly getting some concessions, but he wouldn't order a full-scale war. I couldn't have been more wrong. Ukraine is 8 hours ahead of Central Time where I live, so it was 10:19 in the evening for me on February 23rd, 2022, that I got the most chilling text that I have ever received in my life. It simply read,
Shelling began on the cities of Ukraine.
This was 6:19 a.m. in Ukraine. This was mere hours after the invasion began. At 4:50 a.m., Putin had made his announcement speech that Russia was going to be conducting a special military operation into Ukraine. He made the false claim that they were invading to protect the people of Donbass, once again acting like Russia hadn't been involved in the war for 8 years already, and claiming, "We are not going to impose anything on anyone by force." We would all quickly understand the level of complete bullshit this comment was. At 5:07 a.m., Russian forces launched missile attacks against Kyiv, Kharkiv, and other cities along the Russian border. So I was learning of these attacks practically within an hour of them happening. Most Americans wouldn't be aware of the war until hours later when they checked the news in the morning. My geography of Ukraine was not as stellar as it is today, so I asked if the attacks were near my friend. Her response:
All of Ukraine, many places. Look at the news now. Putin said that if someone intervenes in this war, he will receive an immediate blow. All only started at 5 this morning. I'm very worried. Putin is a crazy idiot. Strikes on military infrastructures. Zelensky declared martial law throughout Ukraine.
After our conversation, she had things to do to prepare what she could for what might be next, and I tried to sleep. But I mostly spent the night looking at news websites, Twitter, and anywhere I could to get some bits of information on what the hell was happening, as well as reaching out to my other friends inside of Ukraine. My friend wrote me in the evening, Ukrainian time:
We survived this day with losses, but our troops are coping with the onset of the Russian troops. Putin is a terrible person, and you can expect anything from him. He doesn't comment on the situation in any way. I think that the sanctions will not affect him. He is a schizophrenic who pursues some of his personal interests in this war. Today, all of Ukraine was under shelling. Now it's quiet, but since 5 a.m. Russian troops have been bombing the military and some residential facilities in Ukraine. It's terrible to live with such an awareness that your life could end. They say through political channels that there will be an attack on Kyiv this night. We hope with all our hearts that everything will be over soon, without great losses. I read the news and cry, and I can sleep. I can sleep with the thought that our soldiers are fighting for us on the battlefield, our defenders.
Every time I reread those words, I genuinely feel a chill. It's difficult for me to put into words like the dread, the stress, the uncertainty that I felt during these days. I didn't know if everything I wrote her and my other friends was going to be the last words that we were able to exchange together. I didn't know if something was going to happen to them. The morning of February 25th, my friend was able to write again.
The war is on. Russians try to take Kyiv. Explosions are heard. I am far from Kyiv, but the tanks go ahead from the side of the Crimea again.
For those not aware of Ukrainian geography, the Crimean Peninsula is the southernmost point of Ukraine, and in 2014, Russian forces illegally annexed it and used it to invade Kherson, which is directly north of it. Kherson is cut in half, north and south, by the Dnipro River, and my friend lived on the north bank of the river. As the crow flies, she lived about 50 miles or about 84 kilometers from the Crimean border, and Kherson City is about 58 miles or 94 kilometers away. To get to her, the Russians would either have to cross the Antonovsky Bridge near Kherson City and head east, or cross the Kakhovka Dam Bridge upriver. At this point, it seemed like there was a chance that the Russians might not take Kherson. Resistance around Kyiv was strong, resistance in Kharkiv was strong. The hope was that the river could be a successful choke point and stop the Russian advances. Unfortunately, we did not know that many officials in Kherson were traitors and allowed the Russians to roll right through. Over the next days, Russians swept through Kherson. On February 27th, she told a truly chilling story that was absolutely terrifying to hear.
Not far from my village where I am now, the Russians occupied the city. Tonight they shot a family with small children. A nightmare.
We had no concept of what was happening parallel in Bucha, Irpin, and other areas that had already been occupied by Russia, but this was close to my friend. This was the first taste of real, deliberate Russian cruelty that I had encountered. Of course, my response to hearing this horror was to ask if she was going to try and flee before the Russians continued to advance.
I will not run away. I will stay here with my family. I'm in the south of Ukraine. To get to the border, you need to cross all over Ukraine. It's dangerous now.
At this point, it felt safer for her to stay put than to risk going to cities under fire. Unfortunately, Kherson would not be safe from the Russians for long. On February 28th, she wrote,
Negotiations are now underway between the delegations of Ukraine and Russia. We hope for some kind of adequacy in decision making. I think the Russians will set to inadequate conditions.
Later she wrote,
The first round of negotiations seems to have ended, and they're returning to the capitals. I think this is a long story. Time is very important. The more time passes, the more people die.
Little did either of us truly imagine just how long of a story this war would be, just how much time would pass, just how many people would die. And with no end in sight as I am recording this video, 8 years of war in Donbass, 2 years of full-scale invasion, and no end in the foreseeable future without a shocking dynamic shift inside Russia or on the battlefield, it's horrifying. I hope that you guys enjoyed this little look into what it was truly like for people inside Kherson during the first days and hours of the Russian full-scale invasion. If you did, let me know in the comments below, and I will continue to release a video a month throughout most of this year up until the liberation of Kherson. Have a good one.